Accidental leaks from nuclear power plants can be one of the reasons for nuclear hazards. While using radioactive substances, one must be very careful with it. Any energy that we need for all the organelles in a body or organs in a body to function properly, the energy is provided by mitochondria. Countries should not be given permission to use atomic bomb, or even they should not be given permission to manufacture such atomic bombs. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to today's session on Environmental Studies for second semester B.Ba. I'm Dr. Divya, Environmental Studies faculty, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. So in today's session, let us continue with studying Unit 5, that is Environmental Pollution. So in this session, let us concentrate on nuclear hazards and what these nuclear hazards can cause various health risks on human beings. And here I have taken two examples of two important nuclear hazard that has taken place in the world. So talking about nuclear hazard. So definition of nuclear hazard is nothing but any nuclear reaction, radiation or radioactive contamination is called as nuclear hazard. So, nuclear hazard can contaminate the soil, water, air and the environment as a whole. So, any contamination that occurs because of the radioactive substances, we call it as the nuclear hazards. So, talking about the causes of nuclear hazards. So, nuclear hazard occurs because of cosmic rays from outer space. So, the different solar system, the galaxy, that is the outer space that is there, their cosmic rays are produced. So, from these cosmic rays, that is the radiations, they contain some amount of radioactive substances which if it enters into the earth, they can cause nuclear hazards or nuclear pollution. Next is because of emissions from radioactive materials that are present in the earth's crust. So, especially during drilling process, that is during the mining of certain mineral ores from the earth crust, there are chances of these radioactive materials that are present in the earth's crust coming out of the earth's crust into the soil and causing nuclear hazards. Next is because of accidental leaks that can occur from nuclear power plants. So, that is why we need to be very careful. That is why nuclear power plants are not everywhere like how we have the hydroelectric power plants, because hydroelectric power plants are used to generate electricity. Likewise, electricity can also be generated by nuclear power plants. But why the government is not giving, or why the world is against this particular idea of setting up nuclear power plants? There are a lot of formalities and a lot of treaties to be signed by various countries if a nuclear power plant has to be set up. Why is that so? It is because the nuclear power plants, if at all it leaks accidentally, it can cause a lot of problems to the environment, which once it happens, we can never ever reverse it back. And this nuclear accident can be carried generation to generation, where the future children who are coming up, they also will get affected. So, the environment can remain affected for thousands of years if such nuclear accidents occur. So, that is why we have to be very careful while setting up nuclear power plants. So, therefore, accidental leaks from nuclear power plants can be one of the reasons for nuclear hazards. Next is X-rays. So, X-rays are usually done to see the internal organs, right, especially for the bones, and also it is done to check the lungs, any disorders in the lungs and all that. And you might have noticed when you go into a scanning room in order to get an X-ray done, very soon within seconds they try to finish off the X-ray process, because overexposure to these X-rays or the radiations, that is the X-rays, it can cause nuclear hazards in the human being. So that is why. So therefore, X-rays are also one of the causes for nuclear hazards. Next is nuclear accidents that can occur during weapon testing. A lot of countries, they just boast around saying we have nuclear weapons, but what might happen if the people, if the country misuses this nuclear weapon? It can lead to a lot of problems. The best example that we can take of is the Hiroshima Nagasaki incident, right? How nuclear bombing, that is the atomic bombing, was done, and even today the children who are born there are suffering because of that one bad decision that was taken by the US government during those times. So that if they had thought even for a second what might happen to the future, they would have not taken this drastic step. So that is why during accidents that occur during nuclear testing or deliberately using nuclear weapons also during the time of war can lead to a lot of problems. So now it's with between the Russia and the Ukraine, the wars that is taking place, and it is still continuing, right? But thank God, till date, they have not gone in for the use of a nuclear weapon. Otherwise, what can happen, right? The Russians themselves cannot stay in that place in the future because the whole environment will become contaminated, it will become radioactive. So that is why nuclear accidents during weapon testing is one of the most devastating cause for nuclear hazards. Next is nuclear bombing, as I gave you the example of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Next is because of radioactive substances. Radioactive substances are used for a lot of experimental studies related to the earth, that is geology related and all that. So during that time, some accidents occur, some leakage occurs, or proper storage of these radioactive substances are not done. We have uranium, all that. So such substances are not done. It can leak into the environment and it can cause a lot of problems to the humans, the animals and the plants, and as a whole to the biodiversity. So therefore, radioactive substances are one of the causes for nuclear hazards. Next, mining and processing of radioactive ores. So during the process mining of the radioactive ores such as uranium and all that, during that time also sudden accidental leakage or escape of these material into nearby water bodies or into the soil can cause devastating effects on the life of the people. Next is nuclear tests that are conducted under the ground or under the ocean. So these nuclear tests also, once nuclear tests are conducted, those sites should be cleaned properly. They have to be made free of these radioactive substances. If not, they can pose a threat to the terrestrial organisms as well as the aquatic organisms. Next is because of uranium mining and milling. Uranium is one of the very important nuclear material that is used for a lot of creating weapons, that is nuclear weapons. So these mining of uranium which is got from the earth's crust, that also can cause nuclear hazards if proper scientific method of mining process is not followed. So these are the different causes of nuclear hazards. Next, talking about the disaster. So to explain what can happen, how devastating nuclear hazards can be, I have taken two examples here. One is the world's worst experience that had happened many years ago, which is the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. So Chernobyl nuclear disaster, it took place in the year 1986, that is April 26, 1986 in Ukraine, which was then called as USSR, at the Chernobyl power plant reactor. And this power plant reactor, why was it set up? It was set up in order to generate power or electricity which had a capacity to generate 1000 megawatts of electrical energy. So instead of depending on hydric energy, that is water energy, to generate electricity, here they used nuclear power plants was set up in order to generate the electricity. That was, it had a capacity to produce 1000 megawatts of electricity. But what happened here, due to mere negligence, a explosion occurred in this particular nuclear power plant. So the explosion occurred because of faulty shutting down of the plant. So when the workers left the plant after their working hours, they did not shut the power plant properly. And because of this faulty shutting of the power plant, what happened? The combustion of the graphite rods inside the reactor did not stop. Continuously the combustion took place because they did not switch off the equipment. They forgot to. So because they forgot to switch off the equipment, what can happen? Imagine a simple oven in your house, right? You forget to switch it off. Of course, automatically ovens get switched off when you set the time, or you don't set a time and you forget to switch off the oven. It will get heated up, and finally it may tend to blast. The same thing happened here. They forgot to shut down the power plant, which actually caused the heating up of the graphite rods that was used in the nuclear power reactor, which actually led to the explosion of these. So what happened was the temperature of the reactor went up to 2000 degrees Celsius. Imagine 2000 degrees Celsius. And with that 2000 degrees Celsius, what a massive blast it might have caused, right? So this blast actually resulted in the release of radioactive debris, gases and plume that drifted or that spread over the entire northern hemisphere of Sweden, Norway, Poland and Denmark. So these are the regions which are surrounding Ukraine. Apart from Ukraine, the debris, whatever radioactive debris was there, which came out during the blasting of the power plant, that high explosion of the power plant, it spread to northern hemispheres, that is Sweden, Norway, Poland and Denmark, causing a lot of problems to the human life there. And because of this, more than 2000 people died in the disaster, and apart from that, many children were affected with some of the congenital abnormalities. So abnormalities were seen in the children because of this disaster. And apart from that, this disaster, it damaged agricultural crops, plants, and also it caused cancer, it caused lung disorders, eye and also blood disorders. And many European countries like Denmark and Sweden what they did was they completely banned milk from Ukraine. Why they banned milk was because obviously the grasses got contaminated, the pastures got contaminated. If the cow feeds on these pastures, these grasses, the radioactive substances will enter into the cow and it will mix with the milk. So that milk, if it is consumed by the human beings, it will cause various health problems in them. So that is why the milk was completely banned. European countries completely banned milk from USSR or from Ukraine. And why? Because this milk was contaminated, which had entered the cows through grazing on pastures and also the grazing on plants, which was contaminated by these radioactive substances. So imagine this can prolong for years together. It usually causes a lot of problem in children. So the newborns who are there, even after 50 years also, the newborns who are there, they will have some congenital disorders in them. So that is why it is not today's or tomorrow. Say for example, a flood occurs, it is just for that particular day or for a month. After that, people's life will get back to normal. But that is not the case with nuclear disasters. Nuclear disaster once happens, you cannot come back to normal life. It is not at all possible because it can cause a lot of health issues which nothing can be done of. So therefore, it is very, very important to be very careful with the nuclear power plant. So this was one of the best example for nuclear hazard that occurred in Chernobyl power plant, and that disaster that occurred in the year 1986, that was said to be one of the most devastative in whatever destructions had occurred so far in the world. And even today, people get chills when they think of it. So just browse in Google and have a look at the photos. By looking at the photographs of the nuclear disaster itself, you will understand how devastating it was. So this is one of the example. Next example that I've taken here for nuclear hazard is from India, that is in the year 2010. It is called 2010 Mayapuri incident. And this incident occurred only because of pure mere negligence by the so-called educated people, so-called scientists. So if scientists only do such mistakes, then how can we expect the common man to learn something or go on the right path, right? So here what happened was, Mayapuri is actually a place in Delhi. So the Delhi University, they used an irradiator. So they were working on something. So they were actually doing some research work on an irradiator. So what they did was, they wanted to make money. So it is always like that, right? Nothing that is anything that is old, which is broken, they'll not dispose it of. They'll accumulate it. This is what happens in most of the education institutions, especially in universities. Finally they give it to the scrap, right? So that they can get money out of it. The same thing they did here. So how illogical of them to think of selling such a material to the common people who doesn't even know anything about it, right? So that is what happened here. So the Delhi University, they were working on an irradiator. So what they did was, once they finished with all the experiments, they decided to sell it to scrap dealers. So scrap dealers will not know the importance of that particular material, the what problems those materials can cause. He will have no idea about it, right? So what they did was, these scrap dealers, they started using that particular material, and unknowingly they started cutting that material and using it for various other purposes and all that. And what happened, during the process of cutting, they came in contact with radioactive cobalt substance which was there in that particular irradiator, and this led to several health problems, or even severe health problems, and also death of that particular person or the scrap dealer, whoever was dealing with that particular irradiator. So this is truly completely because of negligence by the university people, that is University of Delhi. So if they had thought twice before, instead of thinking of making money, if they had thought twice about the health of the person, they would have not done this, right? So this is also one of the nuclear hazard that happened in the year 2010. So next, talking about the nuclear hazards and what these nuclear hazards poses different risks on the human health. So it affects the functions of the cell and the organelle. So cells, usually they need to divide. So there is a particular process, right? Like it is called as mitosis, wherein the cell division will occur, wherein one cell becomes two daughter cells. Two daughter cells can divide and become four daughter cells. That is how, exactly that is how they need to divide. But what happens here is, the division process or the mitotic process gets affected here, and therefore the function of the cells, and if the cells get affected, the organs will obviously get affected. So it will affect the function of cells and organs, and it causes damage to the membranes of the cell. It causes damage to the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. It causes damage to the cell's nuclei. Therefore it will cause abnormal cell functioning, abnormal cell division, and abnormal growth rate, and also it can cause death of the cells. Eventually the cells will start to die. So here what happens, say for example, we have mitochondria. Mitochondria is called as the powerhouse of the cell. Any energy that we need for all the organelles in a body or organs in a body to function properly, the energy is provided by mitochondria. Now if that itself gets affected, then it will alter the functioning of the body itself. And talking about the nuclei, all the organelles, including the mitochondria's function, is controlled in a proper way by the nucleus. Now, if the nucleus of the cell itself is affected, then none of the function in the body will take place properly. So, therefore, it will result to a lot of abnormalities and it causes genetic mutation. So, these nuclear substances or radioactive substances, they can cause genetic mutations in future generation because of damage to the DNA molecule. So, radioactive substances can damage the DNA. So, if that damaged DNA is carried to the future generation, then it can cause a lot of mutations, and mutations always lead to genetic disorders, cancer, etc. And not just that, it can cause blood and bone cancer if the person is exposed to doses around 100 to 1000 roentgens. So, this is the unit of measurement for radioactive substance. So much if he is exposed to, then the person can get blood and bone cancer also. So, these are the different hazards. So, apart from that, internal bleeding can occur, blood vessels can get damaged, and also red spots can start to appear on the skin, which means that the blood vessels of the person has been damaged. And also it causes a lot of stillbirths. So what a stillbirth means, the baby will be developing in the mother's womb, but the baby will be dead and the mother gives birth to a dead baby. That is causes of birth of dead babies, and defects in the newborn babies can occur. Nuclear hazards can destroy cities, it can destroy animals and plants, it can cause loss of hair, it can cause anemia. Anemia is nothing but wherein the RBC count in the blood completely comes down. It can cause infertility or reduction in fertility in women and also in men. So, these are the different hazards. And next, continuous exposure of a person to various nuclear waste or to radiation may lead to cumulative radiation damage and death. So, continuously if a person is exposed to certain nuclear radiations or radiations released by radioactive substances, then it can cause death of the person as well. So, these are the different hazards, that is human health hazards caused by exposure to radioactive substances or nuclear radiations. Next is, what are the control measures that can be followed in order to prevent nuclear hazards? One is the laboratory generated waste. So, whatever experiments is conducted in the laboratory using uranium or any nuclear materials or radioactive substances, those nuclear waste should be disposed properly and scientifically in underground tanks. So, what they do is they dig deep pits. In that pit, they make a wall and then they'll use a tin. Inside that tin or drums, they have to dump the radioactive waste, then close it properly and put it in the pit and then cover it so that it doesn't come out of the earth. So, that is how it is actually disposed of safely. Next, nuclear power plant should be located in areas after careful study of the geology of the area. That is, the tectonic activity of the area should be checked. So, any major volcanic eruption or major flooding, then earthquakes, all that should not happen in that particular area. Otherwise, what happens? Whatever radioactive waste are buried deep in the ground, that can just come out, right? So, that is why geology of the area should be perfectly checked, and if it is suitable, then only it should be a site for radioactive disposal or setting up of nuclear power plants. Next, appropriate protection against occupational exposure should also be done, wherein the workers who are working in the nuclear power plant, they have to be given proper gear so that their entire body is protected from the radiations. And not just that, they have to have a monitor in their coat, which will, or in their jacket or whichever bodysuit they are wearing, which will actually give the reading, that is how much radiation the person is being exposed to. So, all that should be there, that is by wearing of radiation indicators to know the total amount of radiation to which they have been exposed to. So all this can be taken. So these appropriate measures should be followed if we have to stop nuclear hazards. Next, leakage of radioactive elements from nuclear reactors, then careless use of radioactive elements as fuel and careless handling of radioactive isotopes must be prevented by using proper insulators made of concrete. So, while using radioactive substances, one must be very careful with it, and safety measures against accidental release of radioactive elements must be ensured, or they must make sure that accidental leaks should never happen in a nuclear power plant. And unless absolutely necessary, one should not frequently go in for diagnosis by X-rays. So X-rays are not quite often preferred. Usually doctors will avoid. Only in certain cases when the cure has not happened and there is no other option, then they go in for the X-rays. Otherwise, doctors never prescribe unnecessarily X-rays, because even extra exposure to X-rays can cause a lot of health hazards in human beings. And regular monitoring of the presence of radioactive substances in high risk areas should be ensured. So the soil, the water, the air, everything should be regularly checked wherever the nuclear power plants are set up, in order to make sure that no leaks of these substances has occurred into the environment. And atomic bomb explosion should be completely stopped. Not just stopped, it should be banned. Countries should not be given permission to use atomic bomb, or even they should not be given permission to manufacture such atomic bombs, because the best example that we can take here of is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even that you can go to Google and just read about it. At least you'll feel sad for at least half a day, because that was such a devastative explosion that had occurred because of the war that was declared by the US on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that was the reason. So because even today people still suffer from various genetic problems because of the explosion that had taken place many years ago. So these are the control measures. So this was about the session wherein we studied about nuclear hazards and what health risks these nuclear hazards can pose on the human being. So in the next session, let us study about the solid waste management and what are the different control measures for managing urban and industrial waste. So I hope you understood this session well. So we shall meet again in the coming session with these two topics. Thank you.